Komo mai, welcome to my channel, Mowo Musings. I read and analyze how stories reflect and shape our world through my personal lens as a Pacific Islander. I did a post about me video recently, so check it out if you'd like. For this video, I'm continuing on my previous video with my top reads of 2024, but focusing on nonfiction this time. 2024 was a lot for me. Half of my year had very little reading because I was finishing my master's while working full time, but I did manage to read 57 books. Of the 57 books, I have a dozen that I rated 4.75 to 5 stars. Of the 12, half are fiction and half are nonfiction. So I'm focusing on the 6 nonfiction books for this video. The first book, we're starting off really strong, Project 562 by Matika Wilbur. I learned about this book because I've been listening to the All My Relations podcast for close to 3 years now, always hosted by 2 incredible Indigenous women, created and hosted by Matika Wilbur, the creator of this book, and Adrian Keene. Very much recommend the podcast. Now back to the book. For the sake of representing this book accurately, I'm pulling the following from the Project 562 website. Project 562 is a national photography project dedicated to photographing over 562 federally recognized tribes, urban Native communities, tribes fighting for federal recognition, and Indigenous role models in what is currently known as the United States, resulting in a unprecedented repository of imagery and oral histories that accurately portrays contemporary Native Americans. To date, Matika has visited members of over 400 nations throughout 40 states. This book comes after a decades-long effort. As you can imagine, her photo collection is immense. Leading up to the book release, she pointed out on social media that not everything could fit in one book. So I sincerely hope that we are blessed with another book. This is so much more than a photo book or a textbook. It holds so many insights, reflection, and inspiring stories. It all showcases the depth of culture, language, and community. The beautiful cover is a portrait of Dr. Henrietta Mann, who has spent 50 years contributing to Native higher education and reflects on this expression of love on her portrait page. The book also features Kanakamo'oli, Native Hawaiian, showcases the famous Dallas Goldtooth. You may know him as an activist or an actor. Most recently, he was in Reservation Dogs and Resball. And some of the portraits are just completely breathtaking. So one of them that really struck me is this one of Jocelyn Roselle. And this one is absolutely gorgeous as well. When I first viewed it, I didn't even notice the bald eagle. It's just seeking to change the way we see Native America. The next book, We Will Be Jaguars by Nemonte Nenquimo. The author, born into the Waorani tribe in the Amazon rainforest in Ecuador in the early 90s, speaks to her experiences in childhood with the missionary schools and how her culture and people were demonized. Throughout the book, she also showcases her growing up, growing older, and her people realizing the lies the extractive logging mining companies tell. Rivers, air, and land continue to be polluted around the extractive company work sites, and her people fight to keep them off their land. The author reveals the realities of how people can slowly be stripped of culture and rights through false promises. And this is showcased in multiple pages, but one I wanted to kind of call out was on page 178. For the better part of my life, I had followed the white people. I had hammered my teeth out for them. I had left my home for them. They had filled me up with hopes and dreams, and then they had broken me. And she continues this sentiment throughout the book. And it really came to a head for me when she was speaking on page 198. I had left the forest many years ago because I believed in the white people. I trusted them, thought they were better than us, their skin, their teeth, their clothes, their planes, their promises. But now I knew they had no limits. They wanted everything. They wanted to save our souls and change our stories and steal our lands. Those distant oil wells rumbling in the depths of the village night, those wells were creeping closer and closer. I still didn't know what to do about it. This next quote ran chills down my spine. This is something I've thought myself, and the rage and tension building up to this moment in the book are so evident. The Siona people are on the verge of extinction, she said. Her voice was raw with fury. And we don't need anthropologists or government ministries to explain to us why. It's plain as day. Look at this. This is in reference to the extractive companies that are on the lands and their impact on the surrounding people, the people that live in the very forest that they're extracting from. When facing the government and the courts, the tribe makes it clear the importance of their connection to the land and uses the United Nations definition for Indigenous peoples and extensive research in GIS pinpointing to prove that their tribe's extensive connection in history to the land. As a reader, you face the stark reality of the impacts you have in this story on the Amazon, in the forest where the extractive mining is taking place. Also, this book makes it very clear that we as a reader have a continual disconnect that we've developed over years in how we view nature as separate from our own society. The third book, Wayfinding Leadership by Professor Chellie Spiller, Hoturoa, Barclay-Kerr, and John Panoho. This is ultimately a leadership book that challenges modern leaders and empowers everyone to own their ability as a leader and make change for a more inclusive and compassionate way forward. I tabbed the fuck out of this book. Professor Spiller is Maori and worked with Hoturoa, a Waka voyaging canoe captain, also Maori, to develop this book. Looking to Pacific Islander wayfinding crews, leadership skills, and techniques, the book introduces the reader to traditional skills of wayfinding and adapts these skills for a contemporary context. It also covers certain histories and terms the reader may not know in the introduction of the book. For example, if you didn't know, Pacific Islander wayfinding was banned by colonizers for a time because it is considered dangerous and it didn't use European sailing equipment like a sextant, for example, so it was banned. The introduction also covers the definition of the eternal present. Wayfinders hold the past and the future in the present intention in what is best described as the eternal present. Wayfinders refer to the wisdom of ancestors and consider future generations. They see the future destination in the present moment. They move from stillness and do not retreat from the world to achieve it. And it really dives into how the authors view leadership. Leaders are agents of change and challenge the status quo. Management focuses on getting work done and turns the vision into a chart of action to be executed by the team. Leaders need to deal with complex organizational dynamics, respond to unpredictable and chaotic challenges, and create meaning and purpose amid uncertainty. A new paradigm of development is needed, she says, one that helps leaders develop capacities for collectiveness, participation, and responsiveness to complex challenges. The book is organized around 5 waypoints. Waypoint 1, orientation on how to lead. This chapter really orients the reader to the shift that needs to happen in modern cookie cutter leadership. An over-reliance on plans can remove us from reality and each other, resulting in a highly detached, disconnected, and abstract way of living. Many of us are more comfortable living in the constructed reality of what a strategy, spreadsheet, or KPI system tells us than listening to our own internal intelligence and reading the signs around us. I loved the important conversation around how a lot of companies currently view employees as abstractions, a line on a spreadsheet, or a percentage of spend, rather than people with families and beautiful lives. Point two surrounds implementing values. This chapter showcases how values are important and can't be superficial, but are often treated as such by companies. Values, when practiced, imbue the leader's behavior and actions such that the leader and their values are not separable. Many organizational values appear to be for decorative purposes rather than for anything real or meaningful that happens in an organization. For many organizations, values simply grace boardroom walls, annual reports, or company websites. Some leaders do not appear to personally seek to embody the values in their everyday actions, nor do they expect others to do so. On the Vaka, the voyaging canoe, as well as in our lives collectively and individually, it is important that everyone seeks to embody the highest values. People want to see congruency between a leader's values and behavior. They expect integrity between what is exposed and what is practiced. Leadership integrity is generated when a leader acts consistently and congruently with his or her values. Numerous studies have identified leadership success as a commitment to modeling integrity through behavior congruent with a strong set of values. I appreciate this book so much because it gives specific examples in modern day leadership, contradictions between what is said and what is done, and how a more collaborative and inclusive way to lead can fix contradictions and ultimately create better leadership. This book really helped. When I think about my culture and how I want to live that out, it often conflicts with having a typical career. This book will help me navigate both, living out the values of my culture day to day. The fourth book, By the Fire We Carry, by Rebecca Nagle, a journalist and citizen of Cherokee Nation. This book beautifully weaves together two very connected stories, one following a small town murder in the 1990s that made it all the way to the Supreme Court with a decision that set a new precedent for native land, and the other story following the long history of the U.S. and the Five Nations, Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Creek, and Seminole. A history where the U.S. time and time again deceived, misled, and gave false promises to the Five Nations I mentioned. As a reader, I learned so much about the established treaties and the times the U.S. dismantled the treaty's power through the courts. The chapters rotate between the two stories and slowly reveal a clearer picture as the book progressed. Like many others that grew up in public school, I generally knew the disenfranchisement of Indigenous peoples, and I know some examples, but this book gives various concrete instances where this was done using legal frameworks. The author writes, "Sometimes I hear the sentiment that if Indigenous nations had only fought harder, colonization would have turned out differently. People who say this don't know how hard our nations fought, or that turning away from armed conflict was a matter of survival, not will." If you've ever thought this, the author dispels this thought very quickly in your mind through this book. The next quote shows the emerging contradictions in U.S. law to the reader. Justice Marshall's three decisions, Johnson versus McIntosh, Cherokee Nation versus Georgia, and Worcester versus Georgia, often called the Marshall Trilogy, are considered the foundation of federal Indian law today. But rather than laying out clear and consistent rules, the decisions openly contradict one another. Contradictions are not uncommon in the arena of federal Indian law. There is a better way to understand the complexity, says Ojibwe legal scholar Maggie Blackhawk. It's a battlefield. As Native people resisted colonization, they shaped U.S. law, winning some fights and losing others. Cherokee legal advocacy created a legal foundation that both subjugates Indigenous nations and recognizes our inherent sovereignty. Going back to the first quote that I shared, drives the point that survival was only an option. It wasn't included in all the options. It was one of the options. If Cherokees took up arms against the United States, they would likely face extermination. If they stayed and became U.S. citizens, the tribe, as a sovereign nation, would cease to exist. Removal to them was the only option in which Cherokees, as a people and a nation, would survive. Overall, this book is incredibly well crafted and informative. I read it in 2 days. I also tabbed the fuck out of this book and love that the author provides a hefty list of additional reading at the end of the book. Almost like a third of the book is further reading, sourcing, citations, and index as well. Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. This is a book that my lovely fiance urged me to read as I searched for inspiration post-election. This is actually his copy with all of his notes. It was a perfect recommendation from him. The book was written in 1967, but it is very much relevant to this day. Progress is a long road, and counterattacks slow things down, but I just have to remember if I stay strong, continue learning, remain agile, I can do what I need to do to get things done and make a change. These quotes wrap up the state of society and why change is essentially so slow. American society is essentially hospitable to fair play and to steady growth toward a middle-class utopia embodying racial harmony. But unfortunately, this is a fantasy of self-deception and comfortable vanity. Overwhelmingly, America is still struggling with irresolution and contradictions. It has been sincere and even ardent in welcoming some change, but too quickly apathy and disinterest rise to the surface when the next logical steps are to be taken. The practical cost of change for a nation up to this point has been cheap. Limited reforms have been obtained at bargain rates. There are no expenses and no taxes are required. Each step forward accents an ever-present tendency to backlash. The next quote is reference to when riots and social unrest are discussed in the media, but what's often missed is the reason why and the change that needs to happen. Social justice and progress are the absolute guarantors of riot prevention. There is no other answer. Constructive social change will bring certain tranquility. Evasions will merely encourage turmoil. This is in reference to why change is so slow and the counter-revolutions that happen when progress is made. Unfortunately, when hope diminishes, the hate is often turned most bitterly toward those who originally built up the hope. The next quote highlights the fact that you cannot simply appear as an ally, but you actually need to do something. Love that does not satisfy justice is no love at all. It is merely a sentimental affection, little more than what one would have for a pet. Love is unconditional. It is not conditional upon one staying in his place or watering down his demands in order to be considered respectable. Taking action is incredibly important. Remaining steadfast in times of crisis are necessary for progress to continue. The last book I'll cover is Braiding Sweetgrass: Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teachings of Plants by Robin Wall Kimmerer, a member of the citizen Potawatomi Nation. This book I actually listened to. I have no tabbed quotes, unfortunately, but it was such a memorable story, even though I listened to it quite early in the year for 2024, along with her most recent book, The Service Berry, which I have right here, which focuses on the value and community a gift economy can cultivate. Back to Braiding Sweetgrass. Indigenous ways are often seen as not scientific, to essentially gatekeep science, keep indigenous findings and teachings outside of academic fields. It's incredibly frustrating and short-sighted, in my opinion. I am a science degree undergrad, so I saw this rampant in that community. Robin Wall Kimmerer seeks to bridge the gap between science and indigenous knowledge. I found it beautiful how she described fields of purple and yellow flowers and later learning the scientific reason behind this happening in nature because of how bees see the world. This book showcases nature's lessons and our reciprocal relationship with the rest of the living world. I work on environmental issues and have to read a lot for my job, but this book is so unique it has such beautiful and generous views of the earth and how I can do better to give gifts in return on a daily basis. I love reading for the simple fact that books provide me with lessons and seeing the world through a different perspective. I appreciate you listening to me talk about books, so please like and or subscribe if you'd like to see more of my content. Ahoy ho!